This is Dominic. I'm on the phone too, but my computer doesn't look too good with Zoom.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome, Dominic.
Oh, we're not live streaming yet. It's still loading.
Just saying hi.
Sorry.
Let me know where you can go, Eden. Thank you.
We should be good. All right, yeah, we're live.
Okay, excellent. Well, good evening, and thank you for joining us. We have a packed planning committee today. We've got the reauthorization of the CRC, as well as the inclusionary housing and the sidewalk cafe legislation. So we have a packed house. The way we're going to go about it is the first way is we're going to take each legislation as they came in to the council. So we're going to go over the reauthorization of the CRC first, then the inclusionary housing, and then the sidewalk cafe. And we're going to put a hard stop of 40 minutes on each piece of legislation to ensure that every piece gets a fair time to be able to discuss any issues or concerns and not get, just because it's at the end, not get it's just due. So welcome everybody again. Eden, do you mind doing roll call for me? I can't hear you, on mute.
Sorry about that. Okay, so Alfredo Ballerin is here. Is Hoey here? Tom Hoey? Okay,
No.
So Sergio Adams.
Here.
Edward Hyde Clark.
Here.
And Deborah Zamer.
Here.
And then also from the council, it seems Megan Keegan is here, and anyone else? No, that should be it for right now. Oh, and I'm letting in Owusu Anane.
Okay, thank you. And then I know we have Brad from the planning department, Sarah from Capitalized Albany. We also have a group from Housing for All. I see Anita, I see John, I see Dominic, I see Todd. I also see Lewis from the planning department, and I also see David from the mayor's office. Did we miss anybody? Okay, good. I try not to miss people.
Yeah, I'm letting in Gabriela Romero and Maria as well.
Okay, great. So just to go over again, we have a packed agenda today. So we're going to go over the three pieces of legislation as they came in to the council, and we're going to do a hard stop of 40 minutes for each piece, just to be fair and make sure we give each piece its just due. So we're going to start with the reauthorization of the CRC, and I will give the floor to Sarah from Capitalized Albany.
Thanks, Alfredo. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to be the under on your agenda today and free up some time and space, because this is more than a decade in the making, and an organization that's been performing well for the past 12 years. There had been some confusion about this being on the agenda or off the agenda, so I apologize. I don't have prepared remarks or a presentation. I do have a letter that the board of the Capital Resource Corporation has asked me to prepare for the council. As you may know, we had originally requested a permanent authorization for the CRC, which differs slightly from the resolution that was introduced to the council earlier this year. And so if I may, I'll go ahead and read the letter that is being sent to all of you by the board of directors. Sorry, I'm on my tablet and the phone call came in and just obliterated everything. I'll read the letter now, and it reads as follows. Dear members of the City of Albany Common Council, I'm writing on behalf of the board of the City of Albany Capital Resource Corporation requesting action by the Common Council prior to April 15th, 2022 to amend the corporation's certificate of incorporation to permanently authorize the power of the CRC to issue bonds in connection with its corporate purposes. Permanent authorization is necessary to ensure a local option for such financing. With local review and decision-making is reliably available to local civic facility projects seeking to locate or expand in the City of Albany, thereby also allowing the proceeds of the transactions to be reinvested locally, benefiting small businesses citywide. The CRC was formed in 2010 upon sponsorship by the City of Albany and authorization by the City of Albany Common Council. The CRC was formed as a nonprofit corporation and New York State local public authority to provide access to low interest, tax exempt, and non-tax exempt conduit bond financing and mortgage recording tax exemptions for eligible civic facility projects that promote community and economic development and the creation and retention of jobs in the City of Albany. Like many counties and municipalities across the state, the City of Albany created the CRC to fill the void left by the expiration in 2008 of state legislation that eliminated the power of industrial development agencies to assist with these civic facility projects. To our knowledge, we're the only CRC in the state functioning without permanent authorization. Such civic facility projects not only create and retain significant local employment opportunities, but also allow local not-for-profit corporations to construct and upgrade their facilities at lower cost, strengthening these significant economic drivers at the heart of their neighborhoods. Local organizations that have used CRC assistance include Albany Medical Center, St. Peter's Hospital, the College of St. Rose, Albany Leadership Charter High School for Girls, Daughters of Sarah Nursing Center, KIPP Tech Valley, Albany Law School, and others. Since its authorization in 2010, the corporation has assisted 10 City of Albany entities, generating more than $296 million of investment and supporting over 10,200 local jobs. The local fees generated by these projects have allowed the City of Albany CRC to sponsor 4 successful small business grant programs that have encouraged investment citywide. These programs, Amplify Albany, the Small Business Facade Program, the Downtown Retail Program, and the Neighborhood Retail Program, have assisted roughly 120 small businesses and nonprofits citywide through grants totaling more than $740,000 to date and attracted more than 35,000 people to the city's commercial district. Roughly 60% of this funding has been awarded to small businesses and nonprofits in distressed census tracts. The CRC is the only funding mechanism with broad enough powers to enable and fund these grant programs to serve the entire city. Uncertainty about the long-term sustainability of the CRC jeopardizes planning for both large-scale civic facility project investment and local small business assistance programs. Permanent authorization will ensure our large local employers and smaller nonprofits can consider a reliable local option when deciding how to pursue financing, a potential investment, or refinancing existing debt to strengthen their financial position. These projects have alternative vehicles for the same assistance provided by the CRC, with options at the Albany County CRC, the New York State Dormitory Authority, and out-of-state issuers. These options take the decision-making, review, and reporting, as well as the fees, out of local hands. The City of Albany CRC, governed by local resident volunteers selected by your body, has a proven track record of more than a decade of strong performance. We insist on the highest level of project review, transparency, and compliance, have brought dramatic efficiency to the city's largest employers, and consistently use our fees to provide impactful benefit to local small businesses. As such, we respectfully request that the Council amend the resolution currently being considered to provide for a permanent authorization of the power of the City of Albany CRC to issue bonds. Sincerely, Susan Petto, Chair of the City of Albany CRC, on behalf of the Board of Directors.
Okay. Any questions from committee members? Okay, so this may go quicker than any questions from non-committee members. I apologize. Galbiella.
Thank you. And thanks, Sarah, for coming on. So could you just give a little bit, I think I jumped in a little bit late. Could you tell us what exactly this money is supposed to be used for, and what the application process is like for that?
So it's not necessarily money. So what we're requesting of the council is reauthorization, basically continuance of the organization. And so as stated in the letter, the corporation was created in 2010 to undertake responsibility for providing access to conduit financing for large-scale civic facilities. What makes us different from the other options that these projects have is that we are locally based. So our review is local. The questions that we ask are questions that are relevant to the local neighborhoods and communities in which the projects are situated. And also the fees stay local as well. And so those fees, we have consistently at the CRC, the board has used those to fund small business programs across the city. So the programs that we've talked about with each of the council members previously, the facade programs, the Amplify Albany program, the retail programs, those are all funded in part actually predominantly by the CRC to allow flexibility to have those available citywide to all types of small businesses. So we're not asking for funding. This has been on a 2-year renewal since 2010. Originally, there had been hope that the state would give those conduit bond financing powers back to industrial development agencies, thereby not having the need for capital resource corporations. It's been more than a decade that that ship has sailed. We are now necessary sort of across the state. And so most municipalities and counties have a local CRC operating to be able to take on these projects.
Deborah, please.
Thanks. Just quickly, so I understand, if permanent authorization were granted, would that affect the oversight that the Common Council has at all?
So the oversight that the council has is you are the appointing body for all of the members of the CRC. And we do come in annually to go over with all of you the results of the previous year. So you are always provided an annual report with the findings from the previous year. You're able to remove members from that board at any time if they're not acting appropriately.
So what would permanent, and excuse me if I'm just not, if I'm ignorant of this, but what would how would permanent authorization change? Would it change anything significantly? It doesn't seem that on the oversight side it would. It would just, it creates more stability for the organization, for the corporation, right?
Certainly. It also creates.
Is there any are there any other changes that you think are significant?
Sure. It's the efficiency and stability for the organization to be able to plan multiple years ahead, but it is also the reliability and predictability for some of these larger employers when they're talking about an investment project or looking at a significant refinancing. These are things that are multiple years in the making. And so we often have to really work with those applicants to say, no, our operations have always been stellar. The feedback from the council is always great. We expect that we'll be reauthorized. Please work with us. Please don't go to a different piece. It'll help them in their planning to be able to have certainty that there is the possibility for the local CRC to act. It'll also allow us to plan better for continuity of those small business grant programs to ensure that we will have multiple upcoming rounds. It just helps us with our financial planning and then also knowing that we're going to be able to offer those into the future.
Yeah, thanks. That makes sense.
Any other questions? Okay, Usu?
Yeah, not more a question, but just more a statement. Just want to thank CRC and Sarah and the rest of the team for all the work that they do for our city. Quite frankly, when you talk about the small businesses in our city, the need for CRC and, particularly when it comes to grants. My only thing is that, moving forward, I just hope that we can figure out ways, because you guys are doing a lot of great things and it's not hitting everybody's door. It's not hitting every business, and not a lot of people really familiar with the organization. So, I will support this when it comes to the floor. I want to thank you all for the work that you do, but just moving forward, just to kind of have that in the back of mind to expand with the market, and the city's becoming more and more diverse. There are individuals who have businesses that English is a second language. So just kind of have that into consideration. So, but overall, just want to thank you all for the work that you do.
I appreciate that.
Any other questions? Okay, well, let's have a quick discussion about where we should amend it to be permanent or continue what we've done in the past, which is 2 years, renewal for 2 years. I'll give you a little history. I've been on the planning board for some time, for 4 years, or not, I guess that's some time nowadays. And part of the concern last time it came about was very similar to what was discussed, that new council members may not be aware of all of the benefits of the CRC, as well as the fact that, it, by making it permanent, it would have it would make it so that new council members in the future wouldn't have a say on the body. So that's part of the back and forth that we had 2 years ago on this. I think it's important to share that. I also think it's important that we have a new group of council members. So if the new group of council members feel differently, then that's what we can do. That's what happens when you have new individuals in the room. So I do think there's benefits to both. I think we'd be silly to not reauthorize it, and I would hope that no council would take that action, seeing all the benefits that we have gotten from the organization. But it's up for discussion, and I really would like to hear from the new council members, because that was part of the discussion last time, was that new individuals wouldn't have an opportunity to have a say. I am going to break protocol, and I'm going to allow former council member Dominic speak, because I see his hand is up. And he's also can give us probably much more better history than I can, because he was around the council back in 2010 when this came.
Thanks, Alfredo. I also am a former member of the IDA and the CRC at the council, and it really should be made permanent. In 2010, I was on the council, and there was some controversy then. It actually had to do with unions. They thought that the split of the CRC and the IDAs were a way to get around corporations or businesses or whatever developers to use union workers and wages, and that really proved not to be true. And I think it was a major misunderstanding then. And if anybody wants to contact me about a little more information, I want to tie up the meeting at all. But it really ended up not being anything to do with that, and really it deals with the not-for-profits. And I was on the CRC IDA for almost 7 years, and we raised a lot of the money from the CRC, and it does go right back into the community. And I really feel like it really shouldn't be, it shouldn't have to come up every 2 years. It should be a permanent fixture, and it would make life a lot easier for Sarah and the rest of the people capitalize Albany. So that's all I want to say. Thanks, Alfredo.
No, thank you, Dominic. Hyde.
Thank you, Alfredo. I just wanted to voice support for permanent authorization. I think 2 years is not long enough. If someone had a recommendation to extend that out, I'd consider it. But to me, it's an important organization. I don't see the city going it's an important vehicle to have. I don't see another that type of organization coming and taking its place, and I would be in favor of the permanent authorization. That's it.
Any other committee members? Well, do any committee members or do any members have any concern with making it permanent? Okay, so speak now or forever hold your peace. Okay.
Oh, just really quick, Sarah, how many members are appointed by the council on CRC? And how many is
All of them.
appointed by the mayor?
All of them are appointed by the council.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Okay, so with that, can I get can I get someone to put a motion on the table to pass this with an amendment to make it permanent?
So moved.
No, I can't make the motion. I need.
Make a motion to amend to approve this audit committee with the amendment to make this a permanent authorization.
Do I have a second? Second by Adams.
Second.
Yep. I got your hand. Okay, let's do a vote. Everyone in favor?
Aye.
Pass it as
Aye.
amended. Aye. Anyone against? Okay, anyone abstain? Okay, unanimous. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you all so much. This is a huge relief every 2 years to be gearing up for this. It'll help quite a deal. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for all the work that the CRC is doing for our city. Okay, let's go to the next topic, inclusionary housing. So let me just give you a little bit of background information on this specific bill. So I've been working on this for a little bit over a year and a half. It was the same time that around the same time we were discussing increasing the women and minority businesses rates for the city contracts for our city. It was the same time we started the conversation on this issue to raise our inclusionary housing numbers. Right now, they're currently at 5%. The bill that's been pushed forward would move that to 18%. Currently, it's at 100% of the median income. The bill that's moved forward is at 50% of the median income. And currently, it's at projects of 50 units or more. The current bill in front of you is at 20 units and more. I think the goal of the bill is to address a lot of the inequities that we have seen in our city. The goal of the bill is to address a lot of the redlining that we've seen in our city. I think you can go down a list. If you look at all the, and as part of our conversation, a map was put together of all the affordable housing that's been built and all the market rate housing that was built. And you can put a red line right across Central Avenue, where you can see where all the affordable housing was on one side and all of the market rate was on the other. So our city has had a history, policy where it's individual, where it's right or wrong. We've had a history of having two different cities in under one border. So this policy is the goal of it is to make it so that we address that issue, also so that we celebrate the development without fear and anxiety about gentrification, without fear and anxiety of individuals being pushed out of their neighborhoods and out of their homes, and with a much more fair and just manner in making sure that we grow and we grow in a way in a manner that everyone benefits, and no one feels that they're being pushed out. So that's a little intro to why this bill is being presented today, and also a little bit of a background information about it. I would like to start with if Brad from the planning department can maybe give us a little bit of just updates of where we currently are with our inclusionary housing policy, and then any comments that may come from the planning department.
Yeah, so thanks for having me, Alfredo. I think currently we've had about 77 units come through under the current policy. Looking at the list of projects here, trying to count them real quick. About 15 projects that this had applied. Our USDO was adopted midway through 2017. In this particular policy within the USDO took effect at the end of the year. So there was a 6-month period where it was not applied. So from the beginning of, say, 2018 through 2022, it's created about 77 units. That's at 100% city AMI, which is quite a bit lower than regional AMI. And that is one comment that I would make looking at the legislation. I know when we had some preliminary conversations with Anita and Todd and Dominic and some of the others, we did talk about switching to regional AMI, so that 50% number would not necessarily be as low as 50% city AMI, which is quite low. Looking at, we did send a couple documents around. There's more where those came from. There's quite a lot of literature out there on this topic now. Some of the larger cities in particular have had policies in effect for a number of years. So they have had some chances to study and fine tune those. And I think most of the documents I read really spoke to the unique circumstances in every place and the different ways that the policy can be applied, and making sure you get that right, particularly with the economics of it, because it is an internal cross subsidy program. So, I think if we were to, had we applied the policy that's currently on the books for the last 4 years, that would have created an additional 225 units or so, somewhere in that range. And I think as a tool for creative affordable housing, it's merely one tool of many that really needs to compromise a full, well-rounded policy on that. I think it is more of an effective tool for integrating neighborhoods economically and potentially as a preventative measure for neighborhoods that may be gentrifying rapidly. I think you'd get different opinions on whether or not that's occurring in Albany, but some communities are selective in where they apply the policy to sort of hot market neighborhoods, and a lot of times you do see these policies in hot market communities, because in order to create those lower rents, usually you're raising some of the other rents in the development to offset that loss of income, or you're subsidizing it through some sort of a public mechanism. And as I think you've heard from others, the amount of subsidies that we currently give out and the amount of due to our tax structure, the amount of competitiveness with surrounding municipalities that maybe don't have those same tax structure situations that we do. I just think it's something that the council should look carefully at. I admire the fact that you are taking a look at it. Again, it's a tool that many communities do employ. And I think, something that my biggest reflection on the original policy is it was done in haste, and that made it very difficult on us to understand the policy that we were applying and enforce the policy adequately. Luckily, we haven't had too many of these. I mean, luckily, but practically we haven't had too many come online. So from an enforcement perspective, we're still in an okay place, but we do need to get on top of that. And I know that ACDA, the building department and others are working on that now. We've only got a couple of projects that are online. So I think we're good, but I think we do need to fully flesh that out going forward, whatever his roles and responsibilities are. And again, if we want it to work, making sure there's adequate staff, that those staff are, believers in the policy that they're applying, and have the tools at their disposal to sort of see it forward in the right way. So I've already said more than I intended to say, so I'll leave it at that. But, I'm happy to work with you all. And, again, hopefully you'll spend some time on this. Hopefully there's some type of a market study that looks at what the tolerance is for Albany and what other sort of incentives that the city applies that may be in competition with what we're doing here. But again, I think, Alfredo, you did really speak eloquently to the situation we have, both in terms of race, but in terms of income, to the disparities across neighborhoods. And seeing that we address that moving forward, I think this is something that could be beneficial in that approach. So thanks.
Thank you, Brad. And Sarah, any questions for Brad? Sergio.
I was just going to say, I think Brad did really laid it out there in a clear, concise way of kind of where things are right now. For me, looking at it from a planning perspective and looking at the 2030 plan, I think, obviously I'm in support of the affordable housing percentage going up higher, but realistically, I think the feasibility of this, we have to be intentional in terms of the incentives that we're also providing and the different strategies. Because just as Brad has mentioned, inclusionary zoning is just one tool to be used. We have to have other incentives and things around that to make these projects feasible, not only for the community, but also for the developers. While we could have, had a higher percentage to increase the affordable housing units that we have now, one of the biggest things on my mind is ensuring that as we are advocating for this increase, that we're also putting into place a more strategic but intentional plan to how to move forward with developers in the future, and not leaving things off the table when it comes to options for them. I've been doing studies, and I think there was a project before where a developer did a in lieu payment. That's an option that could be on the table. There are density bonuses and other tools that can be utilized if we look at our neighborhoods and figure out what neighborhoods could benefit from, and trying to, again, just be intentional with our design process in this. So again, I think, Brad, you did a good job clearing that up, and the discussion should be geared towards what incentives and how can we make the projects feasible for the future.
Thank you. Megan?
Does anybody else have their hand up? Because I'm not a committee member. I have to wait. No.
Any other committee members? I didn't see any.
Okay. So I just want to make sure, Brad, that I understand a couple of your points. One, when we talk about the differences between the city and regional thresholds, are we talking about a greater expansion of what would qualify as affordable housing in terms of income between the region and the city?
Correct. The city AMI and the regional AMI are quite different.
Because the city is
lower. It's quite a bit lower.
the city's overall income is lower, correct?
Correct.
In the census data?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. And forgive me, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. I believe when we looked at the original policy, I don't even want to throw numbers out there, but I think most federal policies, and in terms of like our community development agency and what they administer, it's almost all based on regional AMI. So I think just from a mechanics of administration and having those numbers readily available and not have to do our own calculations, I think using a regional number is a better approach. And I think, 50%, from what I've read, most inclusionary policies are effective at 60 to 80% regional AMI. So I think 50% city AMI would be particularly low. Inclusionary zoning has a hard time reaching the very low incomes. So I think if it were 50% regional AMI, that's closer to, 80% city AMI, or I don't know what the exact figure is, but yeah, those are my two sort of thoughts on that.
And I guess, and my second sort of piece is maybe perhaps more of a comment in that one of the reasons why this legislation is important to me is that while we have seen a certain level of investment in affordable housing in the city of Albany, that has typically remained within our traditionally previously redlined areas of the city. So we're seeing sort of infill and redevelopment of already depressed areas, and that has sort of continued to allow for the city to remain very racially segregated and very segregated in terms of income between various different neighborhoods. And one of my concerns is that if we don't develop policy that starts to change that dynamic and allow for greater ability for lower income folks to choose where in the city they want to live, we're going to continue to see the trends that we see when you continue to cluster folks who are, asset limited, income constrained, all into one area. And so I do appreciate your comments in terms of this potentially being part of how we start to resolve that, because otherwise I don't see other areas of the city becoming prime for any of the kind of development that might go through like the Albany Housing Authority. So.
Yeah, one thing I would just say, I think we would need to be very careful in applying this policy in areas that, may already have sufficient affordable housing, and that market rate housing may be helping to balance out that ratio. Just a thought. I mean, I know there are concerns from a gentrification perspective too, but I think there are areas where we don't need to create any additional barriers to investment, and whether real or perceived, that is something you'll certainly hear when you try to have this conversation with the development community.
And just as a follow-up to that, Brad, there's nothing that would prohibit us from kind of going back and tweaking that if we start to see trends in which people are being priced out of those areas, correct?
Yeah,
we would just have to do it through legislation, correct?
Correct. Actually, I think what Chicago did is they applied it. I don't know what their indicator was, but they applied it in certain areas, and then they expanded it to include 3 sort of hot market neighborhoods to sort of, test the waters on those. And I did send around the report. I'd encourage you to take a look at it. But yeah, there've been a number of different approaches that have been taken.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Hyde.
Thank you. Alfredo, I was wondering if you could just give a little more background on, you briefly said that you've been working on it for a while, and just curious as to kind of how you came up with the numbers like the 18 and, dropping to 50%. And if you could just give a little more background on, your efforts working on it.
Sure, thank you. Well, we started working on this before we went through the full review of the U.S. Well, actually, let me answer your question, then I'll get to you, Deb. Sorry. Before we did the full review of the rezone. So before we did that, we started working on this, and the pushback was, let's do it when we do with the full rezone. Then we were doing the full rezone, and that was a massive project. And the decision was, let's hold off on that until we get, because we don't want that to hold up the entire, USDO. So that's why we're here today. how I got the numbers, nationally it's 16%. So 16% is what nationally is a national number. The number I was looking for at the time was 15%. But also at that same time, we also were working on increasing the women and minority-owned business numbers, and we got that from 17.8 to 25. Now we have legislation on that same issue to bring that up to 30. So if we would have passed this at the same time, that we passed that other legislation, we'd probably be having a conversation to pick that number up to minimum of probably 18%. Also, we've seen all those projects that have gone through at 5%. This doesn't change any of those. So any of the projects that have gone through from 2018 till this passes will still be at 5%, meaning there's a huge chunk of new development that has occurred that limits, economically where, people can live. And by being more aggressive with the number, it allows us to catch up from where we've lost. So, if we would have gone to 15% in 2000, we'd probably be talking to get that number up today. And all those projects that would have been approved since then would be at that newer number, versus all those projects that have been approved since then are still at the 5%. So it's a way for us to try to get closer to where we want to be in a more aggressive manner. And also, it gets us much closer to it gets us a little bit above the national average, which is 16%. So 16% is kind of the benchmark that we should be looking at. And we should be looking to be more aggressive, I think, based on our history, based on our current structure, and based on the fact that the policy we've had for the last 3-4 years hasn't really gotten us to a better place. If anything, it has just, lit a match on gasoline to, continue the divisions. And again, it's nobody's fault. At least we have inclusionary housing somewhat, in our policy. So it's better than zero. But it doesn't change the fact that as we're growing, the fear and the anxiety and the fact that, certain people are just priced out, and that's just the fact. So that's a little bit of history of how we got those numbers, and where we are today. Deb, did you put your hand down? Did you?
I did, because my question also had to do with the percentages, and where 5% came from, where 18% comes from, why not 25%? But you sort of spoke to that a little bit. I was kind of interested in what Brad had said about sort of targeted inclusionary housing, that I think you referred, Brad, if I understood this correctly, you were talking about Chicago and sort of targeting hot markets, right? Am I correct? That's what you were.
I think overall we're certainly not a hot market. Maybe you can make the argument for some neighborhoods. So I guess that's just weighing the cost benefit analysis here. I mean, again, we're talking about potentially 200 more units. We certainly don't want to discourage housing construction in general for the sake. I think it's just. I don't know what the right number is. I mean, I think that's something.
No, I was just curious
I'm not qualified to answer.
About what you meant by drawing that comparison between Chicago and Albany, which is not really in the same category, but just trying to understand, because that's concerning to me, how you mentioned that you wouldn't want to discourage developments in our, traditionally underserved neighborhoods. So I was just sort of curious about that targeting of neighborhoods that you mentioned. But maybe that's something that we can discuss.
I would honestly, it was more of just giving an example of a particular something that I had reviewed recently. I mean, even in the Chicago sort of, it was like I think it was like a review of several years of their employing the policy. They call out several other cities and they all do that a little bit differently. So there's a number of models that could be employed. And I just kind of think that we should make sure we explore all of them to see what the right fit is for the city of Albany.
All right, thanks. I'm good, Alfredo. Thank you.
Thank you. And I agree. I would love 25%. I mean, we have, there's a city in state, I think it's Rybrook. They're at 50%. They're starting at 2 units or more, so I mean.
Just to follow up, sorry, is there any, I'd also like to see if there's, I mean, I think I've heard the argument that this could discourage development. So I'd like to see in municipalities where a much higher, rate of inclusionary housing has been passed and what effect that's had on development.
No, I think that's important for us to get. I also, I'm going to let other council members talk, and then I'm going to shift to a different. Anyone have any more questions other than Tom and Sergio? Okay, I'm gonna let them say their piece, and then I want to shift to other panelists. Tom?
Yeah, and I apologize for being late. The weather was a little bit rough, and I came in, a few like 20 minutes ago, 15. And I don't know if you guys covered it, but my big concern is enforcement. How do we know that the units, that the percentages, whether it's 5 or 18, and again, I would encourage a higher percentage. How do we know that it's, do we get reporting? How do we know that this is actually going to happen? And that they're following the guidelines within the amounts, what we determine is affordable housing? That's a question that, I don't think it's been answered. I don't know if it came up earlier during this meeting, but I'll leave it at that. I don't know if Brad or you or somebody.
I could sort of answer, Tom, and it was, I will say midway through the policy when we put formal guidelines in place. But since that time, we have been, as a part of our planning board review, which, larger projects of this size are going to go through an affordable housing compliance plan that, following the guidelines, identifies the units that are going to be subject to the policy. And it does look at, the size of those units in comparison to the other units in the development, et cetera, et cetera. I think, at that point, we turn it over to someone else. And I think, Faye at ACDA has been great in helping us because she's much more, party to understanding that. But I do think going forward, it's something that, everyone wants to be transparent about. So I think, yeah, I mean, we do need to better articulate exactly what those enforcement mechanisms are. I know it's been raised as a concern. And I think, again, because we maybe rushed into the initial policy a little bit, that was a little bit, took a little while for us to react. So.
Yeah, and do we have a punishment, or well, I shouldn't say punishment. Do we have like a penalty if you don't comply or you rent an apartment that was supposed to be affordable and we find out it's at market rate? What do we need to build something into this amendment that, these are the penalties? Let's put it out there in black and white. If you don't comply, this is what you're going to be, what we're going to do, or that the city will do. Because you can have a million laws, but if nobody's enforcing them, why are we doing it? It's just, and that's my big concern.
Thank you, Tom. I will say this, that piece of legislation is something we're going to be working on next, because that is key. But the reason we're moving forward with this is because this is what projects that on the pipeline will have to deal with. I look at the last year and a half and all those projects that are still at that 5% that, they're not going to be moved beyond that. So addressing this is it's critical because, you know, we want to make sure that we don't get all these other projects. We give these other projects the opportunity to be at the high rate while we come up with policy on enforcing it as they come to fruition.
And also,
Sergio.
Alfredo, before, one more thing.
No.
I want to make sure that we don't do what just happened, where somebody was allowed to buy out of this with a $300,000 contribution, which I think is baloney, but that's me. We got to have something in the legislation or in future, if you want, that we don't allow that. It's a unit. These are the units that you need to make affordable, and that's it. You can't just buy your way out and, you know, come up with some scam that I believe is a scam. So thank you.
Thank you.
I would just,
Sergio, I'm sorry.
just really quickly to add to that, you know, I think we need to, as we clarify that the policy applies to dormitories, because I think that was unclear. So they had a really good attorney. I'm just going to put it, I'll leave it at that. So.
Sorry, if you don't mind me chiming in, for the guidelines that Brad spoke to before, there is an enforcement piece as well as an administration piece. And so the enforcement and penalty, if the owner or developer violates this requirement, including not constructing the required affordable housing units, the city may deny, suspend, or revoke any and all development approvals and pursue penalties as provided for under Article 5 of the USDO.
Thank you, Martha. Sergio.
All right, thank you. So Martha kind of spoke to what I was about to say, but I was going to say, Tom, like I totally agreed with what you were saying up into like the end point, because again, those in lieu payments is another incentive and option to build affordable housing. Those in lieu payments can be used to be given to nonprofits who are actually working in our communities and giving them money to actually build the affordable housing units that we're unable to reach with inclusionary zoning. So for those those families who are really, really low income, where their AMI it's super low, that money can be used to develop projects like that. And we have more than enough housing organizations to invest in with that money. Now, I would say that when it comes to that amount, that's something that we need to discuss to make sure that they're not just getting away on pennies, but we can also use that money to invest into supportive housing, rehab housing, senior housing, all these different forms of housing. So again, for me, it's trying to figure out what incentives can we utilize to really accomplish the greater goal of addressing the affordability for all incomes. So again, like as we get into more discussion, I think it's important that we again look at our individual wards and where we represent our communities and figure out what we think those incentives would be best there, and figure out those other areas where we know we can't necessarily get to, but collaborate with other entities, whether it's Albany Housing or other housing organizations, to figure out what they have, work with Capitalize Albany to work on the financing to get some of these other projects done. I think that is just another way to utilize inclusionary housing, but also, again, we have to, if we're going to increase this percentage, we have to make sure that it's feasible and realistic. So we need to make sure that we have packages, incentive packages. Again, the comprehensive plan, the 2030 plan, talks about the different incentive packages and the different tools that we could utilize. I think it's important that we, look at this plan and try to adopt it the best way possible, knowing the current situation. That's all.
Thank you, Sergio. Okay, I'm gonna allow, and because I put a hard time ending for each legislation. I've got 6:50 on this one, so I want to allow other panelists to come to be able to speak. Maria.
I have my hand. Yeah. I think one thing we need to do is clarify Our understanding was that we're talking about 50% of the area median income, not the city of Albany.
Yes, I mean, I'm open to look
Okay.
at both the area and the city. I was going to give Brad some homework at the end of our conversation today, on pulling those numbers for us to look at, so we can make a better conversation on that. But I am open to looking at the area income, but I'd like to have both numbers in front of us as we
Right.
have that
Well,
discussion.
the area median income is higher, and I mean, I thought originally we looked at that 50% of the area median income was comparable to 100% of the
Yes.
city median.
So what the goal is to
Right.
the goal is to make sure that people who make X amount of income can afford to live in the
Right.
inclusionary housing. So I mean, that's homework I'm going to give Brad. If he can pull those numbers, if you don't mind, Brad.
You asked me to speak first, and you give me homework.
Well, I'm sorry. See,
I'm already texting with Faye Andrews. She's on it already, so we'll get it.
Okay.
Give us the
Beautiful.
homework.
Thank you. So we can have both numbers we can look at, so we can make a fair assessment. We want to make sure, the goal is to make sure we are making it so that it's affordable, so that we don't push it too high. But so we're starting with the city numbers, and we'll look at the numbers that Brad brings us, and then we can have a conversation about those. But Maria, if you could, I know you're with Housing for All. If you could, I'd like to give you and your group an opportunity to speak a little on this subject. So if you could just, I know you have a couple of your members.
Right.
Who'd you like to speak first, please?
Todd, do you want to make comments? Or Dominic has his hand up, and he's part. Dominic?
All right, thanks again.
Dominic.
A couple quick things. Councilmember Adams brought up a couple things about incentives and payment in lieu of, doing the apartments, and that's something, as he said, has to really be looked at, because so a lot of places do that, and it ends up where developers never develop any affordable housing, and they rather just make the payment, but because the payments are too low. So it's a lot cheaper for them to make a payment than to develop the housing. So I think Councilmember Adams is right. It needs to be looked at, and it has to be a reasonable amount for the payment in lieu of the buildings. One of the suggestions I have, I mean, as I said earlier, I sat on the IDA for almost 7 years, and I was on the Common Council before that. And developers always said they can't afford it, But for during my 7 years on the IDA, and this is when this went into effect, during the last few years of that, we've had more development probably in the city of Albany than we ever had, of apartments being built, even though the inclusionary housing, as weak as it was already introduced. So I think that's a little, you're always going to get that argument. One thing I have proposed is that when the developers come with the project, I think the city assessor needs to, instead of assessing every door, as they say, for each apartment that's say 100,000 each, the apartments that the ratio of the apartments that are going to have to be affordable should be assessed at a lower rate. They'll have to come up with a formula to help the developer, so that the taxes will be a little bit lower to offset the lower rents. I don't think that's done yet, or if it is, it's new, because it hadn't been done before. And I have suggested this for the last few years, that's one way to help the developer, meet the financial obligations of having lower rent. Because when they go for development, and having said on the IDA, we get to see the pro formas, and we get to see what the financial institutions are asking and what the developer is proposing for rents in order to meet the required amount of profit that they have to make in order to get each year, in order to get the money that they're asking for to borrow for these projects. The lower rent taxes are one of the things. So if there's a way to somehow come up with that type of ratio, I think that would be helpful. Another thing, as Alfredo said, this went in pretty quickly a few years ago when they did it. Yes, it was opposed by the then head of the planning department, who now happens to be in Worcester, Mass, by the way. And just to let you to know, Worcester has they go down to 30% AMI, and they have 8,849 apartments for low income. That goes down as low as 30%. So I think it's kind of ironic that he's looking there now as some type of commissioner. And also the population went from 183,000 to 203,000 in the last 4 years, and they've developed much more affordable housing. So again, I think those excuses that you're going to hear, there is some reality there when it comes to finances, but there's also, another reality that people can make that work. And if I may, just one last thing, just so you know, because we mentioned, as Alfredo mentioned, redlining, and that mostly people of color and poor people are still living in the redlined areas of Albany. There was a report that came out today. It was written up in the Washington Post, and Albany was actually mentioned in this report that there's 45 million people in America that still live in terrible environmental areas where the air pollution is bad. And when you look at Albany, we know that there's Apprentice, Sheridan Hollow area, Story, Lincoln Square, all these apartments are in high environmental areas. And one way, if this bill's passed and we do increase more apartments in other parts of the city, it will help diversify the city where the population lives and get a lot of these people that are living in these terrible polluted areas, like Ezra, right next to the port and next to the trains, next to 787, give them a place where they can move and get into a much safer and much healthier part of the city to live in. And it's funny that Albany was specifically mentioned in this study. It was done by the Environmental Science and Technology. Letters is actually the name. It's a journal, and it's a peer-reviewed journal. And they specifically mentioned Albany as one of the cities that has a terrible number of people that are still living in the redlined areas and suffering their health because of it. I'll end there. Thanks.
Thank you, Dominic. Todd, I know you're actually, wait, excuse me. Megan, Councilwoman.
You can let Todd go first.
Okay. Sounds good. Todd, as a panelist, since this is not this isn't public comment, as a panelist, we can ask you questions and so forth. So please, you have the mic.
Thank you. For everyone who doesn't know me, Todd Arena, he, him, his senior staff attorney, Albany Law School's Community Economic Development Clinic. And I've been helping out with some of the research for the development of Housing for All's proposal. So I'm just wanted to jump in with a couple points that I think come out of the research. First off, I would also like to say, I'd be very interested in seeing the Chicago report that you were mentioning, Brad. I'm sure I can get it from Alfredo or something like that, but that's always, more information is always appreciated. First point, just to Dominic's proposal, I think that's just a fix, really, just making sure that, the assessments actually reflect the reality of the discounted cash flow for the building. In the discussion of incentives, that's something that we have, that's not currently reflected in the policy and is something that is a mainstream part of the discussion around inclusionary housing and zoning ordinances. And it very, but to the point, any discussion of incentives has to be tied to a detailed assessment of the actual conditions to ensure that they don't end up just being windfalls. If the property value increases in an area are sufficient that it would sort of offset the negative impact on residential land values that a policy like this has, then the state of the market will justify the policy, a tightening of the policy on its own. And so you really need to have an understanding of how it's going to work in an area, and the incentives are offered to say, well, even if tightening the policy is going to, possibly, adversely affect, a developer's financial feasibility assessments, we still want this higher number, and that's why the incentive is being offered. It's to justify a tighter policy like this after you've sort of done a market study to see that it would actually, in fact, have that negative impact on residual land values. And specifically on payments in lieu, that is a common, incentive. I think it was actually the RAND Corporation had done a sort of omnibus study a couple years back of all of the policies. So not a biased institution in favor of any one constituency, at least in this context. And their conclusion after looking at all the policies was that the issue is not so much that it is the amount, as Sergio Adams was saying, the amount is the issue, and that the conclusion that they came to is most of the time after interviewing jurisdictions that have put in place a payment in lieu and have struggled to keep it at a high enough level that it actually equates to the replacement cost of the lost unit, that it's usually less than the amount of the unit, the value of the unit that was lost. And for that reason, on average, most jurisdictions that have gone that route feel that they would have just preferred to have the units rather than the payment in lieu, unless the payment in lieu is set sufficiently high that it actually acts as a replacement for the lost units. And so that's just something to keep in mind in discussion of any specifics around payment in lieu. On the specific change in the numbers, not so much on the AMI or the set aside percentage, but on the trigger, the size of the development point, a lower trigger, helps ensure the policy would pick up more projects that are likely to have an affordable home ownership component, which is very much part of this policy as written, but hasn't been yet. There hasn't been 50 unit ownership developments as I understand it, and Brad and others can correct me if I'm wrong on that. But lowering that amount might also assist in ensuring that affordable home ownership flows out of this policy sooner rather than later. But just on that point, and just in general, back to the enforcement piece, to make affordable home ownership work through an MIH, you really do need to have a detailed administrative and enforcement structure, because the enforcement is the mechanism by which the city interjects itself into proposed sales and ensures that after the initial purchaser leaves and sells it, that it stays affordable, that the affordability restrictions are in place, and that I think the RAND and a number of these other omnibus reports looking at all of the MIH, they all say the same thing, is that if you don't have the enforcement piece in place, early on, you end up losing all of the, you lose all the affordable units. They market rate out, and whether it's rental or home ownership. So that is a crucial piece to it. And just support the the work that the ACDA planning and building are doing, and that we are continuing to be involved in those conversations about. But so those are just some thoughts that I wanted to interject based on the research I've done.
Thank you. Any questions for Dominic or Todd? Megan?
I don't, it's not actually, it's more so for Brad. One of my other questions in all of this, because we brought up affordability of development, and the question around how these incentives might impact developers. As we know, in the city of Albany, we have very, very strict policies with regards to ensuring that there is on-site parking attached with many of these larger scale developments, which arguably may have a higher impact on development costs than affordable units. And I'm wondering, Brad, if there has been any thought in the planning department as to whether or not inclusionary housing could lead to a tweak in the parking requirement, particularly as we're seeing less utilization than we anticipated in many of these projects that are coming online. So I just wanted to put that out there in terms of how these various pieces might fit together, in terms of making putting in incentives or tying that to be an incentive to some of these development projects to make our inclusionary housing rates really work for developers.
There's currently a 20% reduction that's offered in the code for a certain percentage of affordable housing. It's not exactly aligned with the policy that we're talking about reference in the code. So I think aligning those would help that maybe be better utilized. You could probably go higher than that. I think everything's a trade-off. So, I mean, we hear from people that, not having enough parking is a concern too. So I think those are all things that the council's going to need to.
Yeah.
Fredo's smiling because I hear it from him more than anybody. So it's like, there's a balancing act that happens here. So
I'm just not sure that building parking and including parking on site is necessarily addressing parking congestion, particularly given that parking on the street is free and those market rate buildings are often highly expensive, and then the parking on site is incredibly expensive. And so what we're hearing from developers is that they're not at full utilization. So they got all the incentives they possibly could to reduce the amount of parking they had to include in a project, and they're still not necessarily seeing full utilization of the spaces that they were forced to build. And so, as you know, I think it's like $20,000 a spot added onto the cost of a project on average if you're doing any kind of below ground parking. And then I think it's slightly less expensive if you're doing above ground garage parking underneath the structure, but then you lose your building height perspective in certain zones. So I'm just sort of kind of parsing out potential ways to increase incentives for this going forward that really kind of tackles some of the things that I've heard from developers in terms of their greater concerns. I haven't heard developers really complain or moan about inclusionary housing as much as I have about the costs associated with adding as much parking as we're asking for in the city. So.
Yeah, I mean, I actually think some of the drive for the parking actually comes from the financing entities as much as it from the developers themselves. But yeah, it should definitely be part of the conversation.
Thank you. Any other questions for Todd or Dominic? I see Todd's hands up. I'm gonna let Todd go, and after that, is there anyone else from Housing Forward that would like to speak on this subject? If so, please raise your hand so we can give you an opportunity after Todd. Todd, please.
Thank you. I was just gonna say on the parking point, thank you. That's really helpful to hear those anecdotal, averages for costs. The inclusionary housing literature emphasizes even more so than cost, it's the opportunity cost of the parking space and the fact that with a density or parking, with a density bonus and parking reduction, which are incredibly, those are also incredibly common incentives that are very much part of the mainstream that are offered, that the parking is that you could actually use that as a income generating space. And so it actually, the cost from a financing perspective is even greater than just the cost of building the paving it or building the underground parking, but that it could actually be a source of income, through a density bonus and parking offset package. So just something from the literature.
Thank you. Anita?
So I'm also a member of Housing for All, and I just want to say I really appreciate the seriousness of the discussion we've had tonight. Ever since the initial inclusionary zoning law passed in 2017, we've been trying to discuss revisions of it, and I appreciate everybody's attention to the issues that we've raised. But I also want to point out, inclusionary zoning is not going to solve the affordable housing crisis in the city of Albany. It's simply one step in that direction. So we're not representing that's a panacea for the whole, and we want the council to keep their eyes on other opportunities as well. So I just want to point that out. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, though, this is just one of many tools at our disposal to try to address it. For me, I see this more, I see it more as inclusionary housing, making it so that individuals can benefit from the development that we have and the growth that we have, and also ease some of the anxiety and fear that people have about development in their community, and fears of being pushed out. So I think that's part of what our goal here. Sarah, I know we got 3 minutes left, and I apologize. Do you want to add any input? I know you deal with a lot of our getting our projects and helping developers come and getting them the resources that they need to be able to build in our city.
Sure, thank you. And I echo Anita in being really appreciative of the nuanced discussion that everybody is having around the issue. And it's something that we've been working on and talking with Alfredo about for quite a while. It's something that we work on significantly in our day jobs, as well as the ability to increase affordable housing throughout the city. So at Capitalize Albany, we are really see ourselves as helping to implement neighborhood revitalization strategies citywide. And one is, whether it's Albany 23 or it's a neighborhood plan, everything really has in common is making sure that the development that happens in our city happens in a diverse way. So a diverse mix of uses, a diverse mix of incomes for housing, so that you're not creating too much density of any one thing in any one area. And so we're happy to see too that Rezone supports that from a code perspective. Affordable housing is a challenge to do at scale citywide. We've been working on over the years has certainly been, first and foremost, attracting additional affordable housing developers citywide. So whereas in previous years, it may have been the housing authority doing the bulk of affordable housing, we've been able to attract new groups to the city, firms like Home Leasing, Housing Visions, Regan Development, Conifer. And as we're attracting them, we're showing them opportunity sites citywide. They may get a toehold in one opportunity site, but then move on and become more familiar with the area and take on projects in other areas throughout the city. So think, Conifer looking at Lark Street in Delaware, and then moving on to look at other projects more toward North Albany, or Home Leasing continuing their investment, but bringing it throughout some of the upper wards, or Regan Development starting at Upper Central Avenue, and then shifting into looking at some of the uptown wards as well. So we've been excited to be able to get significant momentum, helping to create more than 1,500 affordable units citywide over the past 5 years. We're also really working consistently on identifying funding sources. There was a lot of talk about the incentives that can be brought for housing. On the affordable homeownership front, condos are incredibly difficult to do in upstate New York. We've been trying to crack that nut for a little while with no success, mostly due to the complexity of permitting and approving condo projects upstate. But we've been involved in things like the Midtown Homeownership Program, assisting Habitat for Humanity with their infill projects, ensuring that affordable homeownership was included in the ARP strategy plan that came out from the task force. But we're also, on the sort of hard financial assistance side, there's very few resources for market rate development. So there aren't really grants from the state that can apply to market rate development. Where most of those financial resources come from is homes and community renewal, and they're mostly on the subsidized affordable housing front. So it may be helpful to have a representative from HCR sort of talk to the group as well about some of the funding sources that are there. Where we do have assistance available to multifamily projects is at the Industrial Development Agency. And so we talk all the time, we focus on two different things at the IDA. We review merit and we review math. And so on the merit side, we know that there's a significant amount of merit to multifamily, both market rate and affordable. On the math side, I think, it's discussed by a couple of the council members and Brad, we aren't what you would call a hot market here, certainly not comparable to Chicago. But even our strongest neighborhoods in the city are still, not breaking into that hot market standing. The returns that multifamily projects see here are really half of what the returns would be in some of those hot market cities that had been brought up previously. So, we do have to really look at the math on a project to make sure that we're able to provide assistance that allows projects to move forward with the environment and market that we have here in the city. So when we had talked with Alfredo originally about an increase, we had looked at the math on an increase to 10%. We thought we could get there with the no other changes if we were to sort of provide as much assistance as we could at the IDA in terms of a payment in lieu of taxes. Right now, we really try to cut as close to the bone as we possibly can. If we provide for a little bit of additional assistance, we can get the projects to pencil out for the most part at the 10% mark. We would really want to encourage the council to do that analysis, the financial analysis on what any increase would do and what types of financial assistance would need to be in place to allow projects to pencil and move forward. And in addition to that, really be able to study the financial benefit of any of the non-monetary incentives that are there. Things like density bonuses are a great idea, but really understanding what a density bonus does in our market versus a market that is a more hot market that you can add significant more density. The math just might not play out the way that it seems like it would on proposing bonuses like that. So really just, again, appreciate the nuanced discussion and the willingness to really dive into this to make sure that we are able to move projects forward that implement our neighborhood plans and grow the city while we're creating affordable housing as much as possible citywide.
Thank you, Sarah. And thank you for your work and all that you're doing for our city. So I want to move on to our next topic, but before we do so, I want to give some homework to all of you, because I know, as you all know, I work in education, so I'm used to doing homework and giving homework. So I've already given Brad his assignment. Todd, if you could please send us some of the data that you have that we can share with the full council, so they can have your reports that you have put together and you found, as well as we'll share the I know we'll share this afternoon the Chicago report and the other report Eden had. Eden, if you can just send that to the full council so they could also, I'm not sure if it went to the full council or it just went to the planning committee.
Yeah, I sent it to the whole council. Everything
Okay.
that Brad sent me, I sent to everyone.
Okay, so we've got that already. So if you can send me what I can forward to, that'd be great. So then everyone would have, I'll send it to Eden and then Eden can send it out to everybody. Sarah, if you could help us maybe identify a developer that would be willing to come and speak to us, so we get our developers viewpoint in this discussion. I think that's important. I don't know how many developers would be willing to do that, but if you can find one that would at least be willing to come and speak to us on their viewpoint. My goal here is to be fair. And that's the overall goal here to do, is to be fair and to hear everybody's viewpoint as we move this forward. Because we don't want this to kill development, but we also don't want development that's not allowed for everyone to benefit from. And that's why I always focus on the inclusionary housing versus the affordable housing, because we have packets of affordable housing and a concentration of poverty. And that doesn't really help build neighborhoods. That doesn't really help give individuals a sense of confidence of where they can live and where they can move and where they can grow in our city. That's why I'm a big fan of mixed income projects, because when you have mixed income projects, you spread out the wealth, you spread out the challenges that come with not having wealth, and you start growing communities, and you start seeing communities that have been challenged, see new energy and new opportunities. So I hope all of us have homework to do, because all of us have to review all those documents that are going to be sent to us. And I look forward to having a further conversation on this subject. Any other questions before I shift over to the next piece of legislation? Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for your hard work and your time on this. Next piece of legislation we have is cafe sidewalks. Martha, do you mind taking the lead on that?
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for putting this on the agenda tonight. So this legislation, sponsored by Councilmember Anani, would make permanent the expanded outdoor cafe program that was initially temporarily authorized through an executive order by the mayor at the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Once the mayor's executive order expired, the council unanimously passed to temporarily again expand or extend the expanded outdoor cafe program, both in, I believe, September 2021 and then again later in 2021. And that expiration, the temporary expiration, or the temporary authorization rather, expired in January. And so again, now this legislation would make permanent the expanded outdoor cafe program. The legislation would also allow for outdoor cafes that are located on private property to be located on property that adjoins the principal or adjoins the structure where the restaurant is located. So I know there's an example, and I might ask Brad for some assistance on this, but Lionheart, for example, and Savoy. Savoy has an outdoor cafe located on property that is not owned by Savoy, it's owned by Lark Tavern. And so the second piece of the legislation would authorize uses such as this when an outdoor cafe exists on a parcel that's not the immediate parcel where the restaurant is located.
Thank you, Martha. Councilman Anani, I want to apologize. Normally, the council member speaks on the subject first, so I apologize. Again, I'm new at the chair position, so I know you're very passionate on this issue. So if you could please just give us a little bit about why you're moving this forward.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And also thank you, Martha, for the explanation. As was mentioned earlier, this legislation is to make permanent expansion of the patio. During the height of the pandemic, many of our small businesses were struggling all across our city. And one of the ways that they were able to stay afloat is the executive order that was made to have additional seating outside. It was not just a benefit for the businesses, it was also a benefit for customers and those who wanted to dine outside. When we implemented and expanded the outdoor dining, at first it was found to be a safe alternative to eating inside. And many small businesses were very grateful to have that option for their customers. So, you think about it, why should we go back to the way things are, right? Out of a crisis, we created an opportunity that helped local businesses and people like this new way of doing of dining. And I think that that was the spirit of us crafting the legislation a couple of months ago to make it temporary. And now that temporary is over, we're looking to make it permanent. So this is why we're doing this. Some of the amendments, I know Martha spoke about it, some of the key amendments to this legislation is, to highlight the inclusion of language which specify outdoor cafe space as a buffer and have protective barriers and landscaping when necessary to protect patrons from vehicles. And also another piece of amendment that's been made is making sure that there's some requirements under the American with Disability and state requirement and guidelines to make sure that when a small business decide to take this option, that they have access for individuals with disabilities. So I just want to thank Martha and the administration for working with council members to make this permanent. And I urge all my colleagues to support this.
Thank you. Any questions? Deborah?
Hi, yeah, I'm very supportive of anything that helps our small businesses to be the best that they can be. I'm wondering, has there been opposition? Have you heard from neighborhood associations, residents, anything like that?
Particularly
Councilman
for-
Anani, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, for our neighborhood, the Pine Hills neighborhood and other neighborhoods, I know there were some concerns about space up for sidewalks, but that has been addressed in this legislation. But overall, there's a mechanism for, customer residents to reach out to the city if there's a violation on a part of the small business. But overall, nothing but positive remarks and support for this from the residents and also from the businesses in the neighborhoods.
Thank you.
Good.
And
Megan?
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I'm sorry. Marta, you want to add something?
Full disclosure, so Councilmember Conti reached out to me yesterday, reached out to the city yesterday, asking clarifying questions about some of the language related to the outdoor cafes on private property. And so we are considering perhaps proposing very small, minor technical amendments, but that would not change anything about the intent or really substance of the bill. But I think related to the use of the word ancillary for the outdoor cafe provision and perhaps tweaking one other language piece.
And obviously the other owner of the property on which the parcel would have to be in agreement.
Yes, there is that's expressly stated
Yeah.
that there would have to be a lease or other agreement. Thank you.
Any other committee members?
I think he meant to call on me. So just one kind of minor piece of feedback, and I do realize that we updated some things to address ADA issues. But one of the things to be aware of, and certainly some of the feedback that I've gotten, and I want to phrase this by saying I fully support continuing the allowance for sidewalk cafes and the expanded use of sidewalk cafes and outdoor eating. But one of the concerns that has been brought up is that while the city did do some work to ensure that there was an ADA pathway after some issues came up, that is not always like a continuous pathway. Every place that we put up one of these outdoor cafes. So in other words, somebody who has mobility issues may have to continue, instead of having a straight path down the sidewalk, may have to continually navigate in and around that walking space as a result of wherever it is that we're allowing for the placement of that sidewalk cafe or outdoor cafe. And I think that that is certainly something that we need to think about. Particularly because it does impact our mobility impaired community members. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
Thank you. Tom?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm very much in support of this. And if there are minor tweaks that need to come up, I think as a council, we can take care of them and address them as they are needed. But this is a good piece of legislation and I'm going to fully support it. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, concerns, comments? Hyde?
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to state my support for this legislation. Look forward to seeing any of the minor tweaks and moving this out of committee and hopefully having a full majority vote from the council. Thank you, Councilman Anani, for introducing this.
Any other thoughts, comments? I'll just add, thank you, Councilman Anani, for adding this. I know you worked on this last year to get it temporary, and I'm glad we're moving it forward to make it permanent. We added it to an already busy and heavy agenda so we can get this moving forward and not have this be held back. So I'm going to ask if any committee members would be can put a motion on the floor.
I move that we put this on the we vote on this tonight and push it out of committee with a positive recommendation.
Okay, Adam had his hands first. Tom,
I'm sorry.
So I'm gonna take you as a second.
Thank
Does that
you.
work? Thank you. So we've got a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, any nays? Okay, it's unanimous. So that passes unanimously. Okay, that's all the business for today. I had us scheduled up to 7:30. I spaced it out so that we wouldn't be here more than an hour and a half with those hard stops. But I'm glad we're able to get these issues two off the table and able to address another one and start the conversation with another one. And we will schedule another committee meeting to continue the conversation about inclusionary housing. And I know we have other topics on that are coming up. So we'll be meeting again soon. Any other thoughts before I ask for a motion to adjourn? Okay, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to
Make a motion to adjourn. Oh, I think Hyde.
Seconded by Deborah. All in favor?
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Danielle, the banner.
You're muted, Danielle.
Oh, I am muted.
Stop recording.
I'm having this full on, yeah.